Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por
Good morning,
participar.
everyone. Thank you for being part of this new cycle of Ask Me Anything. Today, we have Ask Me Anything on reporting, and the dynamics will be as follows. Now we will introduce the speakers, then we'll have a short presentation on the subjects, and finally we will have a short Q&A session. We will ask you for the general questions to open your microphone and camera so that you can ask the questions yourselves, but the chat will be also another way of asking questions should you have any. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to the speakers, Eugenio, Gustavo, and Karen. Good afternoon. My name is Eugenio Garcia. I work as part of the development team at GeneXus, and with Gustavo and Karen, we work in everything related to reporting at GeneXus. Karen? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Bass. I also work in the reporting team together with Gustavo. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Gustavo Martinez. I work in the development team, specifically in the reporting part of basically all areas. So without further ado, let's move on to today's topic. So what have we been doing in terms of reporting with GeneXus 17? In the development cycle at GeneXus 17, we've been working in 4 main areas. We introduced a new output for query objects to show graphic data. We also worked on the expression that can be inserted in the consultation segments to resolve new scenarios and bring in new properties for the topic. We also work to try to improve the UX. GeneXus working with a query object. And in terms of documentation, we uploaded a database of a reporting showcase so that the GeneXus user can know what are all the things that can be done with this query object. Now let's talk about maps. About this point in particular, how can I work with geo reports and geographic data? There is a talk by Karen on GeneXus Live that delves into this, that we will just briefly touch on today. So I would really recommend you to take a look at it if you wanna get some more information about it. Whenever you work with a geographic dimension in your query, you can choose to show that information, to display that information as a map. You can use the map as an output so that the query knows that you're talking about a country. For instance, this country needs to be coded following the ISO 31661 regulation. And if it is a subnational entity such as a province or a region, then ISO 31662 regulation. The indicator of the consult is a number. It's a numeric identifier, and you can use showing 2 different kinds of maps. You can use full maps or bubble maps. If you use the color full map, then the indicator is shown varying the tone of the color, the shade of the color that you choose for the map. And when you're working with a bubble map instead of a choropleth map, you're working with different sizes of bubbles. Both types of maps have advantages and disadvantages, so users can use one of them depending on what is more convenient to them. And with regard to the bubble maps, the geographic dimension, apart from working with a country or region with the ISO 31661 region, you can use a geo point. And this is very useful for cities or specific points across maps. And in this case, the bubble is drawn in the exact geographic location to that geographical coordinate, and not in the center of the region, as is the case of when you're working with countries, for instance. And when you're working with indicators that fall within certain categories that have been predefined and you want to add some color to those categories, then you can implement this using the tiles conditionals, and you can use this both in color path maps and bubble maps. Speaking of new scenarios, in GeneXus 17, in the first upgrade, we restructured the axis properties and visible elements of the query so that we can better represent what is the function of the element in the query and how that is shown, how that is drawn. This was more related to the output before, and now it's more at a conceptual level. You can use the type property to decide whether it's a datum, if it's a cut in the information. And then the visible property is much more versatile. You can choose whether you want to be the element to be shown or not shown, but maybe the user can make it appear, or that it's never shown, that it remains hidden. That will not be part of the graphic output, but the value will be available for it to be processed, for instance, in an event. And if the output is a pivot table, then you can specify through the axis property to which of the axes you're referring to, and where do you want that element to go to rows, to columns, or to wherever. Another thing to highlight is that we added a use domain descriptions property. These are attributes that are based on a numbered domain, and you can choose whether you want to show the value coming from the database or the description associated to that value defined in the numbered domain. This is possible both to show or to order the data, whether it's code or description. We have now we have the query plan. You have the attribute twice. You show the descriptions on one side for visualization, and then the hidden code for the processing through an event, for instance. For the specific cases of bubble maps that show geographic locations, as of the new upgrade that is going to be as of the upgrade 17, we will have a geopoint aspects, also parameters based on geopoint attributes, and also use this as part of our filters. Not only the attributes, but also methods that apply to these types of data. For example, when you want to show points that are at a certain distance from each other. In terms of the UX, we worked with the query editor, especially with the IntelliSense. So now it's much easier to build longer and more complex descriptions. The IntelliSense helps us in this way. And also I wanted to share with you that after the last upgrade, we have a full integration with the language object. So everything that is included in our dashboards and our queries, if they are translated in the language object, that is automatic. And to set up everything related to the design part, for example, fonts and colors and stuff, you may do this not only through the topic object or theme object, but also the design system object that came out with upgrade 16. In terms of documentation, we made it available on Wiki, a reporting showcase that can be downloaded, or you can see it up and running directly on the web. And what's good about this is that you have dozens of examples that are aimed at helping you everything that can be done with these query objects and how to achieve it. So for the sake of time, now I think that we can move on to questions, and the three of us are more than available to answer any questions that you may have.
Bien, como les comentaba, pueden habilitar el micrófono.
Thank you. As I was saying, you may just feel free to open your microphones and ask any questions or write them on the chat. Anyone brave enough to ask the first question? Okay, well, you get some, you muster some courage. I'm going to ask one question that I got through email that says, in my database, I use a country coding that is of my own system, which is the order number country code. How can I show my information per country with this query viewer? Well, as I told you a couple of minutes ago, for the query viewer to understand this, it needs to be coded, even if it's a country. And that coding is the ISO 31661, which alphabetic codes of 2 characters. If in the database it is not coded as such, you will need to add a field to get the coding right according to the ISO norms for that country. That's the way to achieve it. And you can use that attribute in the console, not the order number codes or the own coding of each company or system, but what the control is expecting you to have. Great. Okay, I have another one. What should I do if I want to use a GeoJSON for a country that is different from the ones that I use at in GeneXus? Karen, maybe you've been working on this and you can help us? Sorry, Aníbal, can you say that question again? What should I do if I want to use a GeoJSON for a country that is different from the ones offered in GeneXus? Nowadays, in GeneXus, we're going to offer support for countries with a GeoJSON associated, but if you wanted to use another one, we're going to have soon a repository on GitHub with some predefined ones. So it will have to have the same structure if you want to use it, and that should be included as such in the directories that appear in the documentation. Any comments, any questions from anyone? I think that you're just profiting from all the questions that I have here. Can I show data coming from a data provider? Yes. In Query Viewer, from the very beginning, or maybe not from the very beginning, but for quite a long time already, it's irrelevant whether the datum is coming from a data provider or a query. You can show it in either case. And for this new kind of outputs, which is maps, it stays the same. You can still work with the data in the same way coming from data providers. So it's not necessary for you to have a database, you just work with the data provider. Yeah, the data provider can bring the data from a database or from elsewhere. This data provider has an output SDT, and how that SDT was loaded doesn't really matter. The query viewer may read it anyway and show it anyway. In my consult, I have descriptions, but when I click on it, I need an IP for that description to call a word panel. Is that possible? Sorry. Come again, please, Aníbal. In my consult, I show descriptions, but when I click, I need an ID of that description to get a word panel. Is that possible? Yes, I think this person is talking about attributes based on numbered domains with this new property that I was telling you about of youth domain descriptions that allows me, when I have one of these attributes based on numbered domains, it allows me to decide whether I want to show the codes or the descriptions. So I can show the attribute, I can put the attribute twice. At first showing the description and with the visible option and yes for it to be shown, or then showing the code and clicking visible never, so that that attribute is not shown in the output. But when in the click event, well, then that allows you to read the code, and with that code, you can process it in whatever you want, whatever way you want. For example, you can get information of that code, for example, to show it in a pop-up message.
Perfecto. Bueno, tenemos una pregunta en el chat. A ver, ¿alguien quería hablar? Sí.
Yeah. Hello, welcome. Yeah, my name is Gabriel Medina. I don't know if you can hear me well. Yep, Gabriel, loud and clear. Thank you. Look, I don't know if this is very much related, but there is a standard to handle business information in a tabular and graphic way, which is the International Reference Communication Standard. I don't know if you've heard about that, because I had a question about that way of displaying data, which is basically in an automatic way, given a column graph, for example, you show immediately the previous period in green or red, depending on whether it increased or decreased, well, a certain indicator decreased or increased. So do you know anything about that, or is that something that you're going to be working with soon? So far, this was not a requirement that we had seen. So there is nothing done at the moment for this, but this is totally checkable. It's not something that was studied as part of the plans, but yeah. What is the name of the standard? Yeah, it's IVCS. It's great as a standard, because with just black, green, and red, and well, some gray as well, you can use you can show the present column. So imagine, for example, that you're representing the monthly sales of a year, and then you have in black the sales of the month, in red or green the sales of the previous month, depending on whether that was higher or lower. So for example, if you're comparing it to last year, it can go green or red, and it's so easy for you to visualize the changes and the modifications compared to previous periods. You can work with days and months or years, whatever you want to work with, and you can see it in terms of percentages or net amounts. It's very simple, totally automatable, and it's a great task for GeneXus, I think. Yeah, that's great. We did not know about that standard. Something that is related to that, that's in our radar, and I think is well, it's in our roadmap, is to be able to show the indicator value as you get it from the query, or you want to show it accumulated, or maybe, you know, differentiated to a previous period, and so on. Maybe, you know, the difference with the first value. Oh, that would be great. Yeah, that would be very helpful. I'll take a look at that. Thank you. Thank you. That's all. Thank you, Gabriel. I have a question by Gabriel Gramajo, who's asking, is there any filtering or grouping depending on latitude and longitude that is automatically done, that it translates automatically the location slash geographic region? Okay, so that it identifies coordinates and tells you what country it is, basically. Is that the question in a nutshell? Yes, basically that it does that on the fly, that you get the translation of latitude and longitude into the geographic context and the region where it is, so that you don't need to do the numbers yourself. Well, no, at the moment we don't have anything like that. That is something that the GeneXus user should have to do. Another question related to this, the query viewer. If not on demand, can you trigger it with an automatic refresh or anything of the likes? Let's say so that every 5 seconds or so it does auto refresh, for example, the map. Well, you can program that within GeneXus using, for example, user control timer. If instead of using the query viewer in a web panel, you use the dashboard object through the dashboard viewer, then there is this property that is like auto refresh. And I don't know if it's in how many minutes or how many seconds you want it to auto refresh. So that is done through the dashboard. Okay, that's useful. Thank you. That's great. Well, in the dashboard, you can get just one query, so that does it. Yeah, the dashboard is just to do a number of things, but if you have like one thing in the dashboard, then it's practically the same as using the query viewer. Okay, that's great. Let me tell you why my question, because for example, you have sales that change depending on the geographic region. So for example, here in the States, you start with the east and then you move towards the center of the country. And what happens to us is that we end up having a map that is capturing the sales with the geographic location, and it shows these bubbles growing, these are selling circles growing depending on where more sales are taking place at a certain time. And that is exactly what we needed. And we need to like refresh it manually every 5 seconds or so, depending on the time of the day. So yeah, that was why I had this question. Yeah, you have these two ways of doing it, with the timer or using the dashboard object. Great, thanks. Any questions? Okay, I have another one. How can I change things about the aesthetic, for example, the font, colors, and things like that? That is something that has always been done using the theme object. Now, after the U6, you also have the design system object. And you can use whichever of these two to configure these aesthetic things. For any of for any of the outputs of the query viewer, including maps, fonts, you have color, you have a color, background color, and that kind of stuff. Also lines. After which GeneXus version are maps supported? Oh, that was after upgrade 4. Yep, upgrade 4. Yes, version 17, upgrade 4 with the ISO code. Then with the geo points, that was after the that will be after the following 7th upgrade, upgrade 7. I have a question that I think was answered already, but I'm just asking it just in case. What kind of maps are supported by the query viewer? Okay, so you got choroplasts and bubbles. And then in terms of continents or world, you got world maps per continent and per country as well. And for each country, what it shows you is the subnational or subdivisions entity of first level, whether it's regions or provinces or states. That kind of maps. They have both pros and cons. If the values of the indicator are very similar, then using a choropleth map that is going to show you color intensity is not going to be really helpful, because the colors that will appear will be very similar to each other. And another thing to be considered, for instance, is if you have very small country next to very large countries, then using a choropleth map is a bit interfering because the size of the country is distracting. But if you just want to see the value of the indicator, perhaps if you show it with bubbles, that will be more clearly represented. And that is why there are a number of things that I say need to be taken into consideration. I have another one here. that I think was also answered, but I'm going to ask it just in case. This geographical data needs to be in any special format. So can I use country names, or what language should I use? No, you can't use country names. The only way is using country codes, ISO 3166. You can't use own coding or names, full names, not even in English. It's only the ISO code 3166 for countries and subnational entities. How many indicators can be represented on a map? Only one? This doesn't mean that this is what's going to be and like in the future. It's what the query viewer can do today, trying to represent more information on a single map. Well, that's not being supported at the moment, and it could even be a bit confusing, and the map may be a bit overloaded. I've seen some maps that represent more than one indicator, but at the moment, for now, only one. Only one numeric indicator and one geographic dimension. I think this was also answered, but do we have someone that wants to ask a question? I thought there was a microphone opening. No? Okay, then I'm just... If I wanted to discriminate depending on the indicator's value with preset colors, for instance, say red, orange, yellow, how can you do that? How can you predefine the color, the indicator's color? Come on, your turn, Karen. You're too quiet. You can do that through condition style. The condition style property, you get the different indicators with the associated colors. Do you have an unlimited number of colors, or? No, the same as the indicators. You can associate it whatever color you want. You can say, for example, that values under 100 are green, from 100 to 200 orange, from 200 to 300 red. So that depends on my own criteria, doesn't it? Yes, you will have some ranges, and you can choose whatever number of colors you want. Yes, it's per range. Everything is set per range. Okay, that's great. Are the maps of all countries included? Yeah, Karen spoke about that a couple of minutes ago. There are 10 that are supported, and the rest, the other maps, will be made available in a repository, GitHub repository. If the GeneXus user wants to use a map that is different from these 10 that are included, then they just need to download it, copy it in a given directory following the documentation that will be available as well. And well, the file needs to have a specific name that includes the ISO coding of the country. And with that, and that alone, the query viewer can take that and show it and display it. Let me check, because I have some questions that have been answered. In multi-language applications, if I use a map from the query viewer, do I have to work linguistically? Is it automatic, or? So do you mean if the names of the country will appear translated? Is that what you mean? Yeah, it says that the application is multi-language, so probably it's part of your database. Yeah, now the name of the country, well, it's taken from the map file. So that is the name that will be displayed. In this case, we still have that aspect to overcome for it to translate automatically country names. Yeah, that's not been done yet. It's something to be done in the future. Nowadays, it takes the name of the file as it is on the name of the country as it appears on the file that you use. I have another one that was also answered, but maybe, I will ask it just in case. In terms of subdivisions of each country, it says, sorry, the level of subdivisions of each country, it's the highest level, the first degree level. What happens if I need it to further subdivide countries in a more granular way? Well, that is something that we have considered in our roadmap. We haven't been able to done it yet. We haven't been able to do it yet, but the idea is we have a number of properties in terms of the map. You can choose in your query viewer that you want to see a certain map, and then it asks you what kind of map you want, whether it's a bubble map or a color path map, if it's continent or country. And if it is a country map, then we don't have any further properties. We talked about having the possibility of having a property that says what level of subdivision you want to show. So it's a different kind of map. We have some countries in which that doesn't make sense. For instance, in Uruguay, you have departments and nothing else. But if you go to Spain, then you have regions, and within those regions, you have provinces, or maybe Italy. So is the case of France. Then it would be interesting to be able to choose between one map or the other. That, but that is something that's still on the pending list. Do maps provide events as the other outputs in the query viewer? I mean, can I capture a tick on a country, for example, and trigger an event? Well, Karen is precisely working on that as we speak, so I'll hand over the microphone to her. Yeah, we're working on the click event associated to the map. So, for example, that you can click on an area and you can trigger some information or get a pop-up or something. It's something that we are doing as we speak. Not yet, but you will be able to capture this click event, and also you will be able to indicate whether you want to leave it selected or not, a certain area or a certain country. Once you click it, if it should be just remain selected or not. That is also something that will be done. Okay, I don't want to hog the questions. So anyone from the audience that would like to ask anything? Okay. How can I group by name? How can I group by days of the week? Sorry, come again. How can I group by days of the week after a certain date? Well, I guess you have the date in your database, and what you want is your names. So you have the day of week function in GeneXus that, given the date, that gives you a number ranging from 1 to 7 or 0 to 6, but it's a numeric function that you can use to transform the date into a day of the week as part of an expression within the query objects. And then you can use, well, there are a number of ways of doing this. For instance, you can use a lot of functions, a lot of if functions nested together. So for example, if day of week is 1, then it says, then it displays Sunday. Then you get a comma, another if, and you'll have 7, 6, 7 ifs nested. And then you can use another way of working with if functions, with the if and otherwise functions, where you get something like, for example, between inverted commas, Sunday, day of week equals 1. Then Monday, if day of week is Monday. And then Saturday, for example, you get another way. So if it's a region, yeah, if it's a region, that's going to be quite lengthy, but that would do the trick, yeah.
Perfecto. Por acá me preguntan, necesito mostrar la evolución
Here
de
they
mis
ask,
ventas
I need to show the evolution of my sales discriminated by country, but it's not a fixed number of country, but rather a variable number. How can I do that? That is something that we've had for quite a long time on the query object, which is the for each command. This for each command as part of an expression in the query. I can't really remember now, but I think it's been like that since after GeneXus 15 or so. If you have an indicator, let's say you want to cut it for some reason. So for example, sales, you want to cut it, you want to divide it by country, but it's not for a fixed number of countries that is predetermined, but rather something that is something that you get from a database and you don't know from the very beginning what it's going to be like. So that is when you use this for each command, and the expression would be something like, sum of the sales attribute for each country DSC, which is country description. And what that will give you is a single indicator that is divided in n number of indicators, depending on how many countries you have. And on top of that, you can use a time dimension so that you see the evolution for each of these countries in a graph, for instance. And all of this is thanks to that for each command.
bien. Ahora tengo una que se parece a la anterior que
I have one that is similar to the previous question.
una gráfica por
I would like to show a graph by month name, but not alphabetically, but according to the number of each month. Okay, so ordering the graph according to month numbers. Yeah, not alphabetically. Yeah, because if in the dimension, yeah, you will get the description in alphabetical order. So in GeneXus, for example, the month attribute, if it defines a number domain, you can define a number domain for that attribute, and you can get the 12 values with the 12 descriptions. When you use that attribute in the query, in override, you can use that new domain description property to show or to indicate whether the order should be the month number or depending on the month's name, which would be alphabetical, an alphabetical order, in this case, incorrect. So it's defining a number domain, basing that attribute on that number domain, and in the query property, you get that you want to use the codes instead of the descriptions, for instance.
muy bueno. Por ahí tenemos a Jorge
Great.
de Ecuador que
And we have Jorge Izquierdo from Ecuador that wants to ask us something. Hi, Jorge. Hello, everyone. How's it going? A couple of months ago, I asked Gustavo about the possibility of conditioning filters on the dashboard that are activated or deactivated, depending on some previous filters. So for example, if you're starting with a, let's say, type of client filter, then I don't want to get country information, for instance. So I don't want to see that. I wanted to remain inactive for a while. It may disappear, just like remain inactive. Yeah, that's not been done yet. There's a number of things that we have yet to improve regarding filters, and that is definitely one of them. Okay, thank you.
gracias, Jorge.
Thank you, Jorge.
Acá tengo una pregunta de Elías David Chichi López.
I have a question from Elias David Chichi Lopez. Could you summarize values after a selection of a number of countries or regions?
Lo que pasa que lo que está queriendo hacer es alguna agrupación.
Well, let me see if I get this straight. What you're trying to do is some kind of grouping that is different from, let's say, continents. Yeah, basically it would be selecting a number of countries according to the client's demand. The end user can select countries and they can see the total of their selection. And do you want to show that in a map? Do you want that to be displayed on a map, or yeah, maybe that could be, you know, below the map in a total. And for example, if you don't select any country, then you get a 0. But as you select different countries, it summarizes values below minimally, and then maybe, you know, you could add percentages or things like that. Yeah, for example, you click with your mouse on countries. Yeah, exactly. So you just set that to apply this click element. Yeah, that was exactly what that was what I was going to say. That is not something that is yet available, but Karen is working on the click event. And on this click event, it will be absolutely free in terms of what you can do. So it would be, you know, like you know, when you do multiple selection of grids, well, this would be similar, but for countries. Oh, you want multiple selection? Yeah, for example, I want to select Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, and then go to Europe and select Spain, Italy, Portugal, and to have all of these countries selected. Ah, okay, now I got it. We were thinking about single selection when you click on a country, and if that stays selected, and if you click on another country, the first one is deselected and the second one is remain selected. We hadn't really thought about multiple selection, and that could be an interesting aspect to bring into the table. So that's very interesting. We hadn't really considered that. Yeah, that is, for example, if tomorrow we change a map and we want to use you know, structures such as I don't know, architecture structures, to be able to select a number of sections within a building instead of maps, and so that you can get, for example, percentages and values and stuff like that. Oh, that would be amazing. Yeah, and it's also valid for other kinds of outputs. For example, a column graph, a bar graph, or a line graph that allows you to get a number of lines or in a graph. That's also valid. Yeah, multiple selection was not something that we had thought about, and it's really cool. We're gonna take a look at that. Okay, that means more work for Karen, I guess. Yeah, poor Karen. So I've followed a number of your webinars and I love them. They're so good and they really help you. And I wanted to know more about the roadmaps of each of the topics, because I know that you have roadmaps that comprise a number of problematics simultaneously. But as a developer, maybe, you know, I'd like to know whether you have already analyzed something and it's something that is coming out soon, or maybe, you know, it's not something that you have considered, or an idea that you have entertained. And I would like to make a suggestion for you to take a look at that. So are your roadmaps available? Like, is there any way that we can take a look at that? Well, no, our roadmaps are not available. We're going to have a webinar in December, if I'm not mistaken, mid-December, and we will be working with Armin and Jose Lamas, telling you about some of the roadmaps for the platform as a whole, and we will be talking a bit about each of the areas and what is coming up next. But through our fora or you know, support, you can always ask any questions that you have about that. The biggest thing in terms of reporting on our roadmap from now till the end of the year is web editors. We are working for GeneXus Web with Query and Dashboard. And we'll just like to wrap up this map control with the items and the aspects that we were talking about. Then what we do is we work with an OKR methodology, which is about the goals that we have for next year. And of course, for each product, we have the definition of which are the functionalities in which we will want to work. And that is adjusted every quarter. So that is not written in stone. We have some guidelines that we want to focus on, and then we adapt and adjust depending on the needs that come up on the road.
Bien.
Great.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Ahora que
Any other question?
ayudaron un poco a preguntar.
Now that we have some momentum, some more people asking questions. Anyone else?
En el chat les puse el link.
Okay, on the chat, you will find the link for you to register for this webinar about roadmaps, which is on, the 16th of December.
Con muchas dimensiones y no
I have a query with a lot of dimensions, and not all of them are relevant from the very beginning. How can I get queries by default,
hacer
but
aparecer.
that the user can make them appear one by one?
Bueno, para eso se puede usar la propiedad
Okay, for that, you
visible.
can use the visible property.
Por lo que entiendo es una consulta grande, con muchas
The
dimensiones.
way I understand this is that it's a big query with a lot of dimensions,
Todas visibles.
and you don't want them all to be visible at once, but rather that users can choose which they want to see. Well, these dimensions that you don't want
Ese valor
them to appear immediately, you can get them with visible
útil para una
value, no, and this can be useful for a table, for instance, so that it's not too big and too saturated and overloaded from the beginning. And when these dimensions are marked as visible equals no, then you won't see them. But
ese que aparece cuando clicas arriba a la derecha.
in the pivot, which is what happens when you click up on the right, you have a list of dimensions. So it's just like you will have a checkbox for the different dimensions, and it's just checking those boxes,
Sería la manera.
and it will be shown. That would be the best way to do so.
Para eso para eso
Great.
fue que la
Yeah, that is why, well, this restructuring that I was telling you about of this upgrade one, the visible property went from being true or false to be multivariate, and it's yes, no, never, for it to be more versatile and give more freedom in this kind of sense.
Tengo otra pregunta más. En mi consulta muestro descripciones, pero cuando hago
My
el
query shows just, no, I already asked this question. Sorry.
está respondido.
No, that's it. That was answered. Sorry, I was repeating myself.
Está bien. En mi consulta tengo un indicador
In my query, I have
por año y mes.
an indicator per month, and your I need the percentage of that indicator every month in a year, but the percentage function is calculating the overall value without considering the year. Is that possible?
Año y mes, decía.
So you have year and month? Okay.
Si yo uso la propiedad
Yeah, if you use the percentage property of the element,
con respecto al total de todos
it will calculate it
los meses de todos los años.
in terms of the total of every month of every year. If you wanted to have each year to be 100%,
No usar esa,
then you shouldn't be using that percentage property, but instead you should get you should work with a formula.
el porcentaje sería
So the percentage
digamos, el valor del indicador
would be the indicator's value by
el total para ese año o
the
algo así.
total for that year, something like that. It should be done through formula.
Eso se puede, ahora la fórmula exacta en la cabeza.
I can't remember the exact formula by heart right now, but yeah, there's that's the way to do so. Yeah, you get the divisions, you multiply times 100.
Perfecto. Ahora sí tengo la última.
Okay, now, last question that I got. Is it possible to hide the total of a pivot table?
Bueno, estamos trabajando en esa propiedad.
Well, we are working on that property at the moment,
Porque también la vienen pidiendo desde
because it's something that we've been asked for quite a while, to be able to just delete the totals for pivot tables, both for
no
columns
sé si llegamos a la upgrade 7,
and for, I don't know if in upgrade 7 it will be ready, but if it's not now in this new upgrade, it will be in upgrade 8. That is something that we are developing. As I've said, these are two new properties that are called total for rows and total for columns.
hacen eso.
And what they do is that exactly, whether or not you show the total for columns and rows. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if we have any questions left or if you'd like to make any comment about this. Any comments about what this query has? Okay, you. Anything you want to say? No, I just wanted to talk about the things that we will be working on from now till the end of the year. But if you have any feedback, I've got 2 or 3 things that we hadn't contemplated, new scenarios that we hadn't really thought about to get, to discover new functionalities and try to see what variables we can bring onto the table. So we're more than open to any comments or feedback or questions that you have. Yeah, the things that we include in this query object or in GeneXus in general don't just are not just the result of the development team itself, but a large number of that is because of requests that we get from our users. So we feed on that to get great ideas and new requirements and things like that. Yeah, well, that is the that is our spirit, right? It's, and these webinars are about that. It's creating that exchange that sadly, because of the pandemic, has not been something that we've done in person, but I think that we found a way of doing it virtually, and that's exactly what this is for. So without further ado and no questions left, let's close the session. If you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to ask them on Stack Overflow, which is the platform that we're using nowadays more than anything else to exchange and share with the community. I'll leave the links on the chat. Feel free to copy them. And well, thanks a lot to all of you for attending, especially Gustavo, Karen, Eugenio, Fede, who's always, there for us as well. So thanks all for being here and see you on our next webinar. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Bye.